Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to my garage. I hope you're all doing well, and this particular video is going to begin coverage of not only this week's discussion board question, but I want you to think about it as we move forward into looking at Islam and Christianity and Judaism in a couple weeks. So, in your textbook right now in this week, we're going over the late Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire. And during the time of the Byzantine Empire, we see the beginning and the rise of Christianity. Now, Christianity had been around for quite some time. Christianity is directly related to Judaism. It's an offshoot of Judaism. So Jesus was Jewish, and the concepts and the ideas that are very much steeped in Christianity come from Judaism. And some of those ideas are ideas that have elements of ethics and moral justice embedded in those elements. And when we're looking at the rise of Christianity during the Byzantine Empire, or the Byzantine, well, I don't know if I would call it empire, but the Byzantine period of the late Roman Empire, we have to examine how Christianity becomes so much a part of the Byzantine Empire and really is very much the tool or the mechanism by which Christianity gets into Europe. And that's going to be really important to us because in the Byzantine Empire really it's around modern-day Istanbul, which was a city that was created and built by the Emperor Constantine in the 300s AD. Emperor Constantine was the emperor of Rome, the Roman Empire, and once the empire was heavily populated and the majority of the people living in the Roman Empire were living in the eastern part of the empire, I should do this, eastern part, which would be in Greece and what is modern-day Turkey and the Middle East, Mediterranean, moving east into Iran, Iraq. Those are the areas by which the empire was moving. It was more east than it was west. So Italy, France, Spain, as time went on, and after Marcus Aurelius, around the 200s, 200s AD, we see the empire shrinking, especially in Europe. And so the Roman Empire, while it's shrinking in Europe, it's expanding in the East. And so the senators in Rome and the emperor in Rome decide that they're going to move the capital over to this new city called Constantinople. When it does that, it begins the decline of the Roman Empire in Europe and really creates a big division and a lot of vulnerabilities in Western Europe, Italy, and Western Europe going forward. Once it begins that move east, it really is a gap waiting to be filled by different peoples, and we're going to see tribal peoples really come in and fill that gap. And the Bishop of Rome becomes the Pope and the head of the Christian or Catholic Church in Western Europe. But in the East, though, Christianity is still very, very new. As a matter of fact, the Romans really had no issues with the Jewish people in their empire, because Judaism was a religion that was a very, very old religion, and the Romans recognized how ancient that religion was, and so they respected it. And throughout the entire Roman Empire, there were laws that stated that you could not congregate. People could not congregate in large groups, because when people congregate in large groups, they can create dissent, and they can try to overthrow a government or overthrow an area. It can become problematic when people get together in large groups. You get herd mentality. But the Romans really respected Judaism, and in doing so, they allowed the Jews to congregate. They were exempted from that particular law, and actually many other laws. But the Romans really didn't have religion the way we look at religion. The Romans were pagans. The Romans basically stole all the Greek gods, and they just changed their names. So the Romans did a lot of that. The Romans got schooled by the Persians about roads. The Romans got schooled by the Persians about not micromanaging every part of their empire, and so their empire was able to expand. The Romans really took from the Persians the idea that if you increase someone's standard of living by those roads and be able to create more commerce, and you're more tolerant of diversity, then you're just going to become wealthy, and the local people will become wealthy, and therefore people will want to join in the empire. So the Romans really didn't do some things brand new. They just they took the wheel and they made it better. Now, but when it came to the new religion of Christianity, they were not on board with that, because Christianity in its very, very earliest forms was an outgrowth of hatred towards Rome, because it was part of many different Jewish groups that didn't like Rome, like in the video that you saw last week. What's Rome ever done for me? And if you look at Life of Brian, it's a satire on the life of Jesus, but it's Monty Python. All the men in Monty Python were very, very well educated, and so it is really pretty historically accurate, as most of their stories are. Still, Christianity really becomes an outgrowth after the first Jewish war with Rome that ends in 79 AD, and the destruction of really Jerusalem and the temple complex in Jerusalem. The temple complex in Jerusalem, where you see where Jesus knocks over the money changers' tables, that temple complex, very, very typical in the Mediterranean, very, very typical in the Middle East. It's like that, the ziggurats in the center of the city. As a matter of fact, it looked very much like a ziggurat, 7 layers to it, and it was 10 football fields large. 10 football fields large. That's how ginormous the temple complex was. And the Romans got really peeved with the Jews, and they just destroyed that baby. I mean, they destroyed the whole city. And out of the ashes, like a phoenix rising out of the ashes, were 2 groups of people. One were to become rabbinic Jews, modern Jews, and one became Christians, what we call Christianity. Now, because rabbinic Judaism had been, it's really steeped in these ancient Jewish principles, the Romans, even after they destroyed Jerusalem in the first Jewish war with Rome, and it's called the first Jewish war with Rome, even though they beat the heck out of the Jews, they still respected that religion. Whereas not so much over here for Christians. And throughout the entire Mediterranean, as Christianity took hold, and the big conference, the first what we call ecumenical conference between James, the brother of Jesus, and Paul, it's about, Christianity started within Judaism as a sect. And Paul's saying, no, we got to bring it out to Gentiles, people who are not Jewish. And eventually that is what happens. Paul goes around the Mediterranean world and preaches the gospel, and he goes to Greece, and he goes to he goes all over the Mediterranean, and he does this. And so Christianity grows. While Christianity is growing, however, because there's no real leadership in it, Christianity, as it goes through the Roman Empire from the 1st century all the way up to by the time we get to the Byzantine Empire and Constantine, it is a mishmash group of ideas and concepts. There's not any what we call orthodoxy, not any real, like, this is what Christianity is. There's a lot of versions of Christianity, to the point where that whole idea of the communion, some folks take it literally, where they eat flesh, human flesh, and they drink menstrual blood, which is pretty gross, but real. Okay, so it's crazy. All right, and some of those folks are like cannibals. It's not metaphoric at all. The Romans see that and they're like grossed out. They cannot believe these people, these Christians are animals. These Christians, they are crazy. They're cannibalistic. They're nuts, because there is no real orthodoxy. I mean, even in 150 AD, another I shit you not moment was this guy named Irenaeus of Lyon. And Irenaeus comes up with this idea that there can only be 4 gospels, even though there are many, many, many books written by many of the apostles that we now know thanks to archaeology. But Irenaeus of Lyon says there can only be 4. Why only 4, Irenaeus? Well, there are 4 seasons to a year. There are 4 cardinal directions, and the pièce de résistance, cows have 4 feet. 4, that's it. True, I shit you not moment, okay? So this is crazy pants. And the Romans recognize this, and they don't get it. They're like, I just don't understand these people. So Christianity was outlawed. And Christians became the scapegoats for lots of stuff. You know about Nero and the fires, and Emperor Nero throwing Christians in the lion's den. You know, they're eaten by lions. Some of what Nero does is true. Some of it, meds are true. But nevertheless, Christians are not looked on very well. But over time, Christian leaders get together and they begin to meet. There are 5 Christian leaders, really Christian leaders, and these are called bishops at the time. And there's one, the Bishop of Jerusalem. There's one, the Bishop of Alexandria, Egypt. There's the Bishop of Rome. There is the Bishop of Hippo, and then there's one more bishop, and I cannot think of where that bishop was from. But anyway, they all get together and they create something called an ecumenical council. And at these ecumenical councils, they are deciding with other church leaders, what the heck is Christianity? What the heck do we believe? Do we believe Jesus is a human being, divinely inspired by God? Is Jesus really God? Is Jesus the Son of God? Who is Jesus? He's the Christos? Is he the Christ? Is he the Messiah who has come? Who is Jesus? Those are questions, real legitimate questions that the ecumenical councils are trying to figure out. They try to figure out what do you read? What's the liturgy? What's the dogma of Christianity? What do we believe? Big question in Christianity. What do we believe? And in the ecumenical council in the 300 and 312, they come up with this concept of what do we believe? The profession of faith. or confession of faith, depending on what part of Christianity you're in, you say, I believe in, right? I believe in God, our Lord, and our Lord Jesus Christ. The whole, you're reading out, you say, you profess your faith. Where does that come from? That comes from the Ecumenical Council and Nicaea. And so it's called the Nicene Creed. And though the versions vary a little bit among Christian groups, it's all a profession of faith. And that's where we get it. A Nicene Creed comes from the council, the Ecumenical Council at Nicaea. All right, so because it's also part of, or it stems, the very roots of Christianity are from Judaism. Judaism is called an Abrahamic religion, which is Christianity. And Abrahamic religions are known for their ethics and morals and focus on justice. What is justice? And most of the prophets that you read in the Old Testament start out by haranguing and harassing and fussing at people because you're not listening to God and you're all this. But when you read at the end, it's about justice. And it's really mostly about the little guy being rising up above and being able to beat the big guy. So good always wins in the world. Good always wins over evil. Justice always prevails. That's part of the stories of the prophets. So Christianity, by default, pulls from those resources, and it too takes on principles of morals and ethics, but it does so in just a little bit of a different way. And one particular gentleman arises who we need to talk about, and your textbook definitely talks about it. And his name is St Augustine, or St Augustine. He is the Bishop of Hippo. Now, just before we get to him, let's look a little bit at the differences. He's in Roman Empire, okay? And what's the Roman Empire? It's pagan. It's polytheistic. Polytheistic, P-A-G-A-N. Pagan. Now, let me get my pen out and make sure I spell this right. P-A-G-A-N. Pagan, Roman world. It's polytheistic, so it's many gods. Many gods, remember that. Monotheistic is one God, right? Monotheistic. E-I-S-T-I-C is one God. Now, we'd like to say that Christianity is a monotheistic religion, Judaism is a monotheistic religion. Well, I've come here today to say that's not necessarily true. Why isn't it true? Because in Judaism, when you read the very first book of the Bible, Exodus, and the origin stories come up, if you know the Hebrew, if you read actually the Hebrew, it says, God is speaking and saying, you worship me above all the others. Worship me above all the others. So God is even recognizing that there are other gods in the world. And we forget that little nugget of information. So it is Heno, H-E-N-O, theistic, T-H-E-I-S-T-I-C, which means one God above the others. So it is recognizing that there are other gods. So when Christianity comes up, there is a huge kerfuffle about is it monotheistic or not, because you have God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and in Catholicism you worship the saints. How monotheistic is this really? That's not for me to say, but it is something to think about, and it is very important. The Catholic Church in the 12th century comes in, or 13th century, and says, well, it's a mystery. So figure it out. It's a mystery. So, but you should know the differences between the three, because as we go forward into Islam, it's more of a monotheistic religion than even Judaism or Christianity. So, but the pagans in the Roman world, though they have many gods, they do not have this idea of ethics and justice associated with the gods. Now, there you can make an argument that if you get the gods angry at you, if you piss them off, then the gods will retaliate. Well, the Greeks were really, really great on that. Greeks totally mercurial, meaning up and down, like mercury in a thermometer, hot and cold behavior. I'm angry one minute, I'm happy the next minute. That's hot and cold behavior, right? You're hot, you're angry, you're cold, you're cool. Hey, everything's cool, groovy. And in the Greek mythology, all the gods, they interfered with human affairs all the time, mess you up, play with you, and oh man, they were something. Odysseus really got the deal with the Odyssey, right? He pissed off Poseidon so much that Poseidon said, hey, you think you're so great? I'm keeping your sorry carcass out on the ocean on the sea for a long while until you learn your lesson. And what's your lesson? The gods have more power over me. Yeah, lesson in hubris. Anyway, there's no real connection, though, to ethics and morals like it is in Christianity and Judaism. So, in the Roman world, if you did something bad, you were not motivated not to do something bad because of fear of judgment from the gods. More to the point, you're saying, I'm not going to lie, cheat, and steal because it's bad for the community. Very big idea here. Really, really big idea here. I don't want to, I don't want you to just roll over it real quick. My behavior, according to the Romans, is linked to the success of the community. My behavior is linked to the success of the community, or it's linked to the demise of the community. Your behavior has a direct effect on how the community lives. So if you don't live well, if you don't have integrity and honesty, that's going to be pervasive, or it could become pervasive in the community. And if you take American history, that concept becomes extremely important to the founders, because in the Roman world, there's obligation. Your behavior, what you did, you had an obligation to the community with that concept, with that ideology. Your behavior, if you were bad, if you were lying and cheating and stealing, then it was bad for the community. So you knew, I'm not going to do that. That's part of what integrity is knowing the difference between what you want, what you need to do, and then acting on those things. And not only for yourself, but what's in the best interest of the community. And the Enlightenment theory takes that up, and they put a name to it called the social compact. But for our purposes, it's very important to know that at the time of the rise of Christianity, we don't see morals and ethics and values in the same way with the pagan gods as you do with the Christian and Jewish gods. So now you have a guy growing up in what is the Christian world in the Roman Empire, which I said is a mishmash of things, total mishmash of things. It's every place has a different idea and a different concept, and through those ecumenical councils, they begin to define what is the orthodoxy, what's the official idea of what is Christianity. How many Gospels, how many books of the Bible, how do we put it all together? Because this is decided upon. It's not just, whoa, whatever. It's really, there are real conscious decisions put on this. What do I want in this what becomes the Bible, and the holy book for Christianity. Now, so it's not the world like we have right now. When these ecumenical councils get together, word is spread about them. But remember that telephone story, you say one thing to a neighbor, and by the time it goes around 26 people, gets back to you, doesn't sound like anything that you started with. So it takes time for these concepts of what the orthodoxy, what's officially considered Christianity, gets out really to everybody. And one of the men who really creates the Christianity by which we mostly know in the world today is a guy named St Augustine or St Augustine. Either way to pronounce that is correct. And he is a bishop of Hippo, and Hippo he's not like the bishop of Hippopotamus or hippopotami. Hippo is horse in Greek, and he lives in North Africa. Now, interesting about him is that St. Augustine lives in the Roman world, okay? So he lives in the Roman world, and at this point in the Roman world where he's living, and really actually from the beginning of the Roman Empire and the Roman world around the Mediterranean, people who were educated knew Greek. They were educated in Greek, okay, the language, Greek language. Even if they were Roman, even if they were Latins, they were educated in Greek language, with the Greek language. So Greek was the language of education. Latin, for people who lived in Italy and in the Latin world, Latin was the language, it's called the lingua franca. It was the language of the people they spoke every day. But when you go outside of the Latin world, the immediate Latin world of Italy, you obviously are going into Greece and the Mediterranean and Africa and Egypt, and you're going to get lots of different languages, local languages. But everywhere you went, if you were educated, you were an educated person, no matter where you were in the empire, you knew Greek because that's what you were educated in. If you worked with the Romans at all, if you did anything with the Roman government or worked with the Roman leaders in your area, or if you were going to court or you're doing something within the Roman system, you had to know Latin. You had to know Latin. So that was very, very important in the Roman world. People, however, still very much spoke their local dialect. And Augustine is very much an educated person. He lives in Africa. He speaks the local dialect, but he also speaks Greek and he also speaks Latin. And so he's a very educated person. He's a very interesting man. And he wrote two books. One of those books is called Confessions, which it's crazy pants, over the top. And another one is called The City of God. And the City of God is very similar to the way we see the world. His theory on the world is very much taken off a Zoroastrian model. Still, very important to know who this dude is. Your textbook, like I said, goes into him. St. Augustine comes up with this idea, and he comes up with the idea about original sin. Original sin. Now when we there's a lot of things that we could talk about here, and I have to really make a choice on what it is that we're going to talk about. but we could go all over the board with this, all right? But for our purposes, I think today, and the discussion board question in particular, this is what I'm going to show you this, I'm going to ask you a question about it, okay? So we have St. Augustine. St. Augustine is an interesting guy. I've said that already, I know. So, his mother was a pagan. No, his mother was Christian and a real, purist. She didn't believe in, she believed in marriage was only between a man and a woman, and she was not free sex and all that kind of stuff. But her husband, Augustine's father, was a pagan, and he was wild and crazy, sex with everybody. And so can you imagine growing up in that household? You got a mother who's like, don't touch your body, and don't do this, and don't do that. And you got a father who's like, hey, let's go out party. And so sexuality, he was very much traumatized by. And then he had a moment that would become a PTSD moment for him going forward, which was there was a custom in the Roman world. You've heard, you know about Roman baths, and people would bathe all the time, almost every day, and one particular bath could be for men or women. Men come at one time, women come at another time, whatever. But when a boy hit puberty, and there was a bunch of dudes at the bath, and they're naked, and when a boy hit puberty, all the men would yay, party, 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 this is great. They'd pat you on the back, they'd say, oh my gosh, you're a man now, everything's so cool and groovy, yay. And so Augustine, as it happens, went late into puberty. And so he was traumatized, not only because the guys made fun of him because it took him so long to reach puberty, but then when he did reach puberty, his father, it was like a crazy party that embarrassed him to no end and basically traumatized him about sexuality for the rest of his life. Now, he tells you in his book Confessions all this, so you could read it for yourself. But he talks about, that moment, but he's not like a weird dude. He becomes part of a Christian group called the, I just had the name. He becomes Maccabeans. He joins that, and he has a wife, and they're, they have a healthy sex life. Nothing crazy. Nobody's hanging off chandeliers or anything like that. It's just a regular marriage. It's all cool and groovy. He doesn't seem to be warped in any way, shape, or form. If that's warped. So, but as he gets older, he begins to change his view on things and the way he sees the world. And it goes back to this very strange moment at time of his puberty and the relationship between his mother and him, because his mother follows him. His mother's got him on a pedestal, thinks that he is amazing and follows him. She's a stalker of him. She's crazy. She's a freaking crazy woman. And, and he's just all traumatized by all this. And so how does that trauma come into Christianity at the time of the Byzantine Empire, which really is when we see the legalization of Christianity. So with it being legalized now, it is officially able to be spread throughout the entire empire, and so what message are you going to spread throughout the empire now that it's legal? Well, hello, St. Augustine, because he's the dude that's got the message. All right? So let's look real quick here. We have the Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Right? And we have Adam and we have Eve. Right? Okay, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And so this is Eve and this is Adam. Now, keeping in mind that there are two Genesis stories, we're going to only focus on the second Genesis story, Adam and Eve. And they're in the garden. And so they're in the garden frolicking around. Everything's all cool and groovy, right? Everything's cool and groovy until one day the serpent comes up to Eve and says, "Hey, Eve, look at that fruit." Now, we don't know that it's an apple because when the Hebrew was translated to Latin, the word sounded very much like a Latin word. A Hebrew word sounded a lot like a Latin word that meant apple, and that's where we get apple. But, serpent comes up and says, hey, cutie patootie. You see that fruit? That fruit is delicious. It's so good you could eat it. And if you eat it, you'll love it. And she goes, oh, whoa. Wait 1 second here. I have been told that if I eat that fruit, I will die. And the serpent comes back and says, no. If you eat that fruit, you know what happens to you? You can be like God. You get knowledge. That's what happens when you eat that fruit. Your brain opens up and now you have knowledge and you can see just like God sees. So eating the fruit, taking a bite of that fruit, elevates you out of the Garden of Eden, metaphorically, to be more like God. And so Eve says, I think I'll try it. So Eve takes a bite of that apple or that fruit and says, man, this is great. And then she looks down, she sees herself, she goes, oh my gosh, I'm naked. I am naked, I'm in my birthday suit. I gotta cover myself up. So then she takes his fruit over to Adam and she says to Adam, Adam, look at this. This is delicious, take a bite. And he says, well, okay. And he takes a bite. Now here is where the story gets, we get into the nuts and bolts of the story. Adam is told directly by God. That's what's in the book. Told directly by God. You can eat any of the fruit of this garden, but you don't eat that fruit. That fruit is a tree of knowledge. The tree of life and death, that's a tree of knowledge. And you don't eat that fruit. And so he's admonished directly, saying, hey, you dude, don't eat that. And he doesn't ask Eve like, hey, Eve, wasn't it the fruit that God told us not to eat? No, that's not the story we get in the Bible. What the story is that he just totally like, whatever, and he takes a bite of that fruit. And then he notices, oh my gosh, I'm naked. And look, you got different body parts than I have. How cool. And so that is the beginning. Now, nowhere in the Old Testament, in the story in Genesis, does God directly talk to Eve. So when Eve questions the serpent, obviously somebody told her. It must have been Adam. So now here they go. Adam and Eve frolicking in their new fig leaves and doing whatever. And then they hear God. And this is how it's written. They hear God walking in the garden during the breezy time of the day. It's walking in the garden in the breezy time of the day. And God is saying, hey, Adam, hey, Eve, where are you guys? Hey, where are you? Now, which, of course, takes me to, well, if God knows everything, why doesn't he already know where everybody is? But back to the story. So, Adam and Eve are hiding from him, and finally God finds him, and God says, hey, what are you doing hiding from me? And then he sees him, and he goes, hey, you're in your birthday suit. What are you wearing clothes for? Well, you got the fig leaf on you. Oh, well, and Adam's fumbling for words, and obviously God knows that they have, in that point, God knows that they have eaten from the fruit. Why does God know? Because they recognize they're naked, because they've been walking around in their birthday suits all the time, just like, yeah, how's it going? And not even noticing any of that. So once they notice that they're naked, they cover themselves up. They don't cover up, according to the book, all their body parts. They cover up those parts that are sexual. And so, excuse me, so God says, who did this? What happened here? And Adam responds by saying, it's your fault, or he doesn't really say it that way. It's her fault because you gave her to me. She made me do it. She made me do it. And she wouldn't have made me do it if you hadn't made her. So in that moment of discovery, this is where Christianity and Judaism part ways. So in Judaism, Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden because Adam doesn't own his responsibility to his actions. He doesn't say, oh, I made a mistake. He just doesn't take responsibility at all. There's no accountability for his own actions. But within Christianity, Eve is blamed. Eve is blamed. And once she took a bite of that fruit and they recognized they were naked and they identified their sexual parts and they made a baby because they had to act on sexual impulses because they have these sexual parts. So therefore, you have to act on it. And you make a baby, that's this idea of hereditary. You have just created the next lineage, the next line. So St. Augustine comes up with this idea. So St. Augustine comes up with this idea. So here, let's do St. Augustine. G-U-S-T-I-N-E. Comes up with this idea of original sin. And original sin is sex, basically. Original sin is, and it's everyone is born a sinner. Everyone is born a sinner. A sinner, right? And people talk about that, right? Still now. Now, if you are a sinner, then you have, how did you get to be a sinner? Well, you have fallen from grace. You were in grace in the garden. Adam and Eve were in grace in the garden. And then once they took a bite of that fruit, they fell out of grace with God. And falling out of grace was when they were pushed out of the garden. So how do we get back up to grace? Well, here we have, here's God. Whoa. And here is human beings. Sad because we have fallen out of grace. And how do we get back to God? This is getting to grace. Getting to grace. Well, how we do it is we have sacraments. What are sacraments? Baptism. B-A-B-T-I. And marriage. And communion. So these are things that we do in order to get back into grace. Sacraments equal grace. Okay? Completing the sacraments equals grace. Here's the real sticky wicket. Who can administer the sacraments? Who can administer the sacraments? Only a priest. P-R-E-I-S-T. No, that was right the first time. P-R can deliver or administer the sacraments. Sacraments. Only a priest could administer the sacraments. So what does that mean? Only a priest means a priest equals the church. A priest is a representative of the church, okay? Priest is representative of the church. And so it creates a church body, which becomes a church body politics. So if you want to get back into grace, it has to be through the church. You have to go through the church. Now, Martin Luther comes in later and says, oh, no, you don't. Because when you have to go through the church, it creates a lot of power. The church then has a lot of power over you. And they can wield that power depending on how their mood. So this is what St Augustine comes up with. And it is still very much a part of Christianity today. Now, in Judaism, by contrast, in Judaism, you are ousted from Eden because you were, or you, not you, but because Adam was not accountable to his behavior. And so within Judaism, there's no such thing as original sin. In Judaism, there's no issue with sexuality, but in Judaism, the idea that you can become like God is inherent in the whole dogma and doctrine of Judaism, and the way that you do that is through studying the Torah, and and that opens up your eyes. The Torah is your enlightenment, is your way to the enlightenment, like God is enlightened. Now, so St. Augustine comes up with this idea. So this is a lot of information. Take this in, and then tell me your thoughts on this. What are your thoughts about St. Augustine? Are these principles still in play now? How much do you think we still live by these principles from, that are probably 1,600, 1,700 years old? So history is, when we study history, we are enlightened about the world we live in right now, in the here and now. This is the world that we draw from to practice our faiths, our religions, whatever they may be, but specifically when it comes to Christianity and Judaism. Specifically. What are your thoughts on this? Is this still part of the way people practice Christianity? Is it part of, if you know about Judaism, does Judaism practice it this way? And give me examples on how religion in the 21st century, Christianity, and if you know Judaism is practiced with these same principles that were put together a long time ago. So let's make that connection. All right? And if you have any questions, let me know. I'm here for you. Okay. Bye. Be safe.